and I'll make that the hour, more or less. So, hello everyone. My name, as the custom to be, is SkitterSkreetch. And I am, as I generally am, apparently not always, a little rat. For those of you who don't know, I am trapped inside this this cursed library that I'm in, and I never know how much I need to do this little intro nowadays. Like, I've been doing, how long have I been doing this? At least like a month and change. I sort of feel like, you know, I've established pretty well what we do here, but I always feel bad about if like someone turns up and they don't know what's going on, feels wrong. So, I don't know. I guess at some point, yeah. I mean, anyone who's around, feel free to tell me whether you think it's annoying or if you think it's useful. Yeah. Other than that, I will, as per my usual habits, be reading you a book night on account of the lamp making me dirt. And in particular, I'm going to be reading. This here book, which is The Prince by a fellow called Machiavelli. I went for a little bit of something different today, because according to Lamp, this isn't a good book, but it is, how's he put it? It says it's important, which is different, but apparently is significant enough that it is, I'm not exactly clear. Like, supposedly that, oh, it's, I'm trying to think. Like, the author has written good books, and this one is, I'm trying to think how to phrase it. I'm not entirely sure I understand myself, really. Lamp, what do you mean by this book being important but not good? Right, okay. Okay. So Lamp is talking about the history of the nation of Italy and republics. And something called real politics. Alright. Okay. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, okay, I think I understand that. I don't know why this book is important. I don't know what makes it not good, but also important. I don't know. I've got no idea. So we're just gonna read it and find out, I suppose. But yeah, this one is in chapters, so we'll probably break after every chapter and do a little bit of commentary and thinking. This one's, I think, non-fictional, so see how we get on with that. What else? Yeah, not much really. As always, if you at any point need me to go over something again or haven't understood something or have some thoughts when we're doing the commentary, feel free to chime in. Other than that, yeah. Let's get started. I'm not sure if this is a... it does have chapters that are called chapters, but there's something before that, so let's have a look. Niccolò Machiavelli, to the magnificent Lorenzo, son of Piero de' Medici. Those of us who desire to win the favour of princes generally endeavour to do so by offering them those things which they themselves prize most, or such as they observe the prince to delight in most. Thence it is that princes are very often presented to them horses, arms, cloth of gold, precious stones, and similar ornaments worthy of their greatness. Wishing now myself to offer to your magnificence some proof of my devotion, I found nothing among all I possess that I hold more dear or esteem more highly than the knowledge of the actions of great men, which I have acquired by long experience of modern affairs and a continued study of ancient history. These I have meditated upon for a long time and examined with great care and diligence, and having now written them out in a small volume, I send this to your magnificence. And although I judge this work unworthy of you, yet I trust that your kindness of heart may induce you to accept it, considering that I cannot offer you anything better than the means of understanding in the briefest time all that which I have learnt by so many years of study, and with so much trouble and danger myself. I have not set off this little work with pompous phrase, nor filled it with high-sounding and magnificent words, nor with any other allurements or extrinsic embellishments with with which many are wont to write, and adorn their works. For I wish that mine should derive credit only from the truth of the matter, and the importance of the subject should make it acceptable. And I hope it may not be accounted presumption of a man of lowly and humble station. It may not be accounted presumption if a man of lowly and humble station ventures to discuss and direct the conduct of princes. Whereas those who wish to delineate countries place themselves low in the plain to observe the form and character of mountains and high places, and for the purpose of studying the nature of the low country place themselves high upon an eminence. So one must be a prince to know well the character of the people, and to understand well the nature of a prince one must be of the people. May your magnificence then accept this little gift in the same spirit in which I send it, and if you will read and consider it well, you will recognise in it my desire that you may attain that greatness which fortune and your great qualities promise. And if your magnificence will turn your eyes from the summit of your greatness towards those low places, you will know how undeservedly I have to bear the great and continued malice of fortune. That's an odd one. Yeah, I suppose you'd call that the introduction. I mean, it seems like it's a... I guess it is an introduction to the original intended. Really, I guess this was meant for a single person. It's a bit odd. I don't think I've ever read a book that was meant for a single person before. I guess we'll find out. Chapter 1. How many kinds of principalities there are, and in what manner they are acquired. All states and governments that have had and have at present dominion over men have been and are either republics or principalities. Principalities are either hereditary or they are new. Hereditary principalities are those where the government has been for a long time in the family of the prince. New principalities are either entirely new, as with Milan, Francesco Sforza, or they are like appurtenances annexed to the hereditary state of the prince, who acquires them as the kingdom of Naples is that of Spain. States thus acquired have been accustomed either to live under a prince or to exist as free states, and they are acquired either by the arms of others, or by the conqueror's own, or by fortune or valour. Right, oh, that's the old chapter. That's half a page. Huh. These are like, well, I suppose we should. Yeah, I mean, this is just defining different types of states, republics or principalities, I suppose. I mean, I suppose one way of doing it is whether a single person or a group of people rules it. That's acquired by. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's a lot more to say than that. I'm not sure how much commentary there's going to be necessary, but we'll get on with it. Yeah. Chapter 2 of Hereditary Principalities. I will not discuss here the subject of republics, having treated of them at length elsewhere. I will confine myself only to principalities, and following the above indicated order of distinction, I will proceed to discuss how states of this kind should be governed and maintained. I say then that hereditary states, accustomed to the line of their prince, are maintained with much less difficulty than new states. For it is merely that the prince do not transcend the order of things established by his predecessors, and that he accommodate himself to events as they occur. So that if such a prince has but ordinary sagacity, he will always maintain himself in his state, unless some extraordinary and superior force should deprive him of it. And even in such a case he will recover it, whenever the occupant meets with any reverse. We have in Italy, for instance, the Duke of Ferrara, who could not have resisted the assault of the Venetians in 1484, nor those of Pope Julius in 1510, but for the fact that his family had, for a great length of time, held the sovereignty of that dominion. The natural prince has less cause and less necessity for irritating his subjects, whence it is reasonable that he should be more beloved, and unless extraordinary vices should cause him to be hated, he will naturally have the affection of his people. In the antiquity and continuity of dominion, the memory of innovation and their causes are effaced, for each change and alteration always prepares the way and facilitates the next. That's the end of chapter 2. Yeah, I mean, that's I think reasonably simple. Generally speaking, if you are a prince who's old or king, whatever, old in a nation, people tend to default to you as being the ruler. That makes sense. Chapter 3. A mixed principalities. It is in a new principality that difficulties present themselves. In the first place, if it be not entirely new but composed of different parts, which when taken all together may, as it were, be called mixed, its mutations arise at the beginning from natural difficulty, which is inherent in all new principality, because men change their rulers gladly, in the belief that they will better themselves by the change. It is this belief that makes them take up arms against the reigning prince. In this they deceive themselves, for they find afterwards, from experience, that they have only made their condition worse. This is the inevitable consequence of another natural and ordinary necessity, which ever obliges a new prince to vex his people with the maintenance of an armed force, and by an infinite number of other wrongs that follow in the train of new conquest. Thus the new prince finds that he has for enemies all those whom he has injured by seizing that principality. At the same time he cannot preserve as a friend even those who have aided him in obtaining this possession, because he cannot satisfy their expectation, nor can he employ strong measures against them, being under obligations to them. For however strong a new prince may be in troops, yet will he always have need of the goodwill of the inhabitants, if he wishes to enter into a firm position of the country. It was for these reasons that Louis XII, King of France, having suddenly made himself master of Milan, lost it as quickly, Ludovico Sforza's own troops alone having sufficed to wrest it from him at the first time. For the very people who had opened the gate to Louis XII, find themselves deceived in their expectation of immediate as well as prospective advantages, soon became disgusted with the burdens imposed by the new prince. It is very true that, having recovered such a revolted provinces, it is easier to keep them in subjection, for the prince will avail himself of the occasion of the rebellion and secure himself with less consideration for the people, by punishing the guilty, watching the suspected, and strengthening himself for all the weak points of the province. Thus a mere demonstration on the frontier by Ludovico Sforza lost Milan to the French for the first time, but to make them lose it a second time required the whole world to be against them, and that their armies should be dispersed and driven out of Italy, which resulted from the reasons which I have explained above. Nevertheless, France lost Milan both the first and the second time. The general cause of the first loss has been sufficiently explained. It remains to be seen now what occasioned the loss of Milan to France the second time, and point out the remedies which the king had at his command, which might be employed by any other prince under similar circumstances to maintain himself in a conquered province, which Louis XII failed to employ. I will say then first, the states which a prince acquires and annexes to his own dominions are either in the same country, speaking the same language, or they are not. When they are, it is very easy to hold, especially if they have not been accustomed to govern themselves, for in the case it suffices to extinguish the line of the prince who till then has ruled over them. But otherwise, to maintain their old institutions, there will be no difference in their manner and custom. The inhabitants will submit quietly, as we have seen in the case of Burgundy, Brittany, Gascony, and Normandy, which provinces have remained so long united to France. For though there are some differences of language, yet their customs are similar, and therefore they were easily reconciled to each other. Hence, in order to retain the newly acquired state, regard must be had to two things. One, the line of the ancient sovereign be entirely extinguished, and the other, that the laws not be changed, nor the taxes increased, so that the new may, in the least possible time, be thoroughly incorporated with the ancient state. When states are acquired in a country different in language, customs, and laws, then come the difficulties, and then it requires great good fortune and much sagacity to hold them. One of the best and most efficient means for the prince who has acquired them to go and reside there, which will make his possession more secure and durable. Such were the course adopted by the Turk in Greece, who, even if he had respected all the institutions of that country, yet could not possibly have succeeded in holding it if he had not gone to reside there. Being on the spot, you can quickly remedy disorders as you see them arise. Not being there, you do not hear of them until they have become so great that there is no longer any remedy for them. Besides this, the country will not be despoiled by your officials, the subjects will be satisfied by the easy recourse to the prince who is near them, which contributes to win their affection, if they are well disposed, and to inspire them with fear if otherwise. And other powers will hesitate to assail a state where the prince himself resides, as they will find it very difficult to dispossess him. The next best means for holding the newly acquired state is to establish colonies in one or two places that are, as it were, the keys to the country. Unless this is done, it will be necessary to keep a large force of men-at-arms and infantry as this protection. Colonies are not very expensive to the prince. They can be established and maintained at little, if any, cost to him, and only those of the inhabitants will be injured by it, who will be deprived of their homes and fields for the purpose of bestowing them upon the colony. And this will be the case only with a very small minority of the original inhabitants. And as those who are thus injured by him become dispersed and poor, they can never do him any harm, whilst all the other inhabitants remain on the one hand uninjured and therefore easily kept quiet, On the other hand, they are afraid to start, lest they should be despoiled as the others have been. I conclude then that with such colonies are inexpensive and are more faithful to the prince and less injurious to the inhabitants generally, whilst those who are injured by the establishment become poor and dispersed, and therefore unable to do any harm, as I have already said. And here we must observe that men must either be flattered or crushed, for they will revenge themselves for slight wrongs, whilst for grave ones they cannot. The injury, therefore, that you do to a man should be such that you need not fear his revenge. But if instead of colonies, an armed force be sent for the preservation of a newly acquired province, it will involve much greater expenditures, so that the support of such guard may consume the entire revenue of the province. So that this acquisition may prove an actual loss, and will moreover give greater offence, because the whole population will feel aggrieved by having the armed forces quartered upon them in turn. Everyone that is made to suffer from this inconvenience will become an enemy, and there are enemies that can injure the prince, for although beaten yet they remain in their own. In every point of view then, such a military guard is disadvantageous, just as colonies are most useful. A prince, moreover, who wishes to keep possession of a country that is separate and unlike his own, must make himself the chief and protector of the smaller neighbouring powers. He must endeavour to weaken the most powerful of them, and must take care that by no chance a stranger enter the province who is equally powerful with himself. The strangers are never called in except by those whom an undue ambition or fear have rendered malcontents. It were thus, in fact, that the Aetolians called the Romans into Greece. In whatever other country the Romans entered, it were invariably at the request of the inhabitants. The way in which these things happen is generally thus. As soon as a powerful foreigner enters a province, all those of its inhabitants that are less powerful will give him their adhesion, being influenced thereto by the jealousy of him who has hitherto been their superior. So that, as regards these petty lords, the new prince will need not any trouble to win them over to himself, as they will all most readily become incorporated with the state which he has there acquired. It is merely the seat that they do not assume too much authority or acquire too much power, for he will then be able by their favour and by his own strength very easily to humble those who are really powerful, so that he will in all respects remain the sole arbiter of that province. And he who does not manage this part well will quickly lose what he has acquired, and whilst the odds that he will experience infinite difficulties and vexation. The Romans observed these points most carefully in the provinces which they conquered. They established colonies there, and sustained the feebler chiefs without increasing their power, whilst they humbled the stronger and permitted no powerful stranger to acquire any influence or credit there. I will confine myself, for an example, merely to the provinces of Greece. The Romans sustained the Acanians and the Aetolians, while they humbled the kingdom of Macedon and expelled Antiochus from his dominion. Neither the merits of the Achaeans nor the Aetolians caused the Romans to permit either of them to increase in power, nor could the persuasion of Philip induce the Romans to become his friends until after first having humbled his power, nor could the power of Antiochus make them consent that he should hold any state in that province. Thus, in all these cases, the Romans did what all wise princes ought to do, namely, not only to look with all present troubles, but also to those of the future, against which they provided with utmost prudence. It is by foreseeing difficulties from afar that they are easily provided against. By awaiting their near approach, remedies are no longer in time, for the malady has become incurable. It happens in such cases, as the doctors say, of consumption. In the early stages it is easy to cure, but difficult to recognise. In the course of the time, the disease not having been recognised and cured in the beginning, it becomes easy to know, but difficult to cure. And thus it is in the affairs of state. When the evils that arise in that are seen far ahead, which is given only to a wise prince to do, and they are easily remedied. But when, in consequence of not having been foreseen, these evils are allowed to grow and assume such proportion they become manifest to everyone, then they can no longer be remedied. The Romans, therefore, on seeing troubles far ahead, always strove to avert them in time, and never permitted their growth merely for the sake of avoiding the war, well knowing that war would not be prevented, and that to defer it would only be an advantage to others. For these reasons they resolved upon attacking Philip and Antiochus in Greece, so as to prevent these from making war upon them in Italy. They might at the time have avoided both one and the other, but would not do it. Nor did they ever fancy the saying, which is nowadays in the mouth of every wiseacre, abide the advantage of time, but preferred those of their own valour and prudence. Time drives all things before it, and may lead to good as well as to evil, and to evil as well as to good. But let's return to France and examine whether she has done any one of these things that we have spoken of. I will say nothing of Charles VIII, but only of Louis XII, whose proceedings we are better able to understand, as he had held possession of Italy for a greater length of time, and we shall see how he did the very opposite of what he should have done for the purpose of holding a state so unlike his own. King Louis XII were called into Italy by the ambition of the Venetians, who wanted him to aid them in conquering a portion of Lombardy. I will not blame the king for the part he took, for, wishing to gain a foothold in Italy and having no allies there, but rather finding the gates of everywhere closed against him, in consequence of the conduct of King Charles VIII, he was obliged to avail himself of such friends as he could find, and would have succeeded in his attempt, which was well planned, but for an error which he committed in his subsequent conduct. The king then, having conquered Lombardy, quickly recovered that reputation which his predecessor Charles VIII had lost. Genoa yielded. The Florentines became his friends. The Marquis of Mantua, the Duke of Ferrara, the Bentivogli, the Lady of Forli, the Lords of Fraser, Pareso, Rimini, Camerino, and Piombino, the Lucchese, the Pinance, and the Sienese, all came to meet with him with offers of friendship. The Venetians might then have recognised the folly of their course, when, for the sake of gaining 2 cities in Lombardy, they made King Louis master of 2/3 of Italy. Let's see now how easily the king might have maintained his influence in Italy if he had observed the rules above given. Had he secured and protected all these friends of his, who were numerous but feeble, some fearing the church and some the Venetians, and therefore all forced to adhere to him, he might easily have secured himself against the remaining stronger powers of Italy. But no sooner in Milan than did he the very opposite by giving aid to Pope Alexander VI to enable him to seize the Romagna. Nor did he perceive that in doing this he weakened himself by alienating his friends and those who had thrown themselves into his arms, and that he had made the church great by adding to so much temporal to his spiritual power, which gave it already so much authority. Having committed this first error, we were obliged to follow it up, so that for the purpose of putting an end to the ambition of Pope Alexander VI, and presently his becoming master of Tuscany, we were obliged to come into Italy. Not content with having made the church great, and with having alienated his own friends, King Louis, in his eagerness to possess the kingdom of Naples, shared it with the King of Spain, so that where he had been the sole arbiter of Italy, he established an associate and rival, to whom the ambitious and the malcontents might have ready recourse. And whilst he could have left the king in Naples, who would have been his tributary, he dispossessed him for the sake of replacing him by another who were powerful enough in turn to drive him out. The desire of conquest is certainly most natural and common among men, and whenever they yield to it and are successful, they are praised. When they lack the means and yet attempt it anyhow, then they commit an error that merits blame. If then the King of France were powerful enough by himself to successfully attack the kingdom of Naples, then he were right to do so. If he were not, then he should not have divided it with the King of Spain. And if the partition of Lombardy with the Venetians was excusable because it enabled him to gain a foothold in Italy, that of Naples with the Spaniards deserves censure, as it cannot be excused on the grounds of necessity. Louis XII then committed these 5 errors. He destroyed the weak, he increased the power of one already powerful in Italy, he established the most powerful stranger there, he did not go to reside there himself, nor did he plant any colonies there. These errors, however, would not have injured him during his lifetime had he not committed a 6th one in attempting to deprive the Venetians of their possessions. For if Louis had not increased the power of the church, or established the Spaniards in Italy, it would have been quite reasonable, and even advisable, for him to have weakened the Venetians. Having done both these things, he ought never to have consented to their ruin, for so long as the Venetians were powerful, they would always have kept others from any attempt upon Lombardy. They would, on the one hand, never have permitted this unless it should have led to their becoming masters. On the other hand, no one would have taken it from France for the sake of giving it to the Venetians, nor would anyone have had the courage to attack the French and the Venetians combined. And should it be said that King Louis gave up the Romagna to Pope Alexander VI, and resided the kingdom of Naples with the Spaniard for the sake of avoiding war, then I reply with the above stated reasons that no one should ever submit to an evil for the sake of avoiding a war. For a war is never avoided, but is only deferred to one's own disadvantage. And should it be argued, on the other hand, that the king felt bound by the pledge which he had given to the Pope to conquer the Romagna for him in consideration of his dissolving the king's marriage, though his bestowing the cardinal's hat upon the Archbishop of Rouen, then I meet the argument with what I shall say further and concerning the pledges of princes and the manner in which they should keep them. King Louis then lost Lombardy by not having confirmed to any one of the conditions that had been observed by others who, having conquered provinces, wanted to keep them. Nor is this at all to be wondered at, for it is quite reasonable and common. I conversed on this subject with the Archbishop of Rouen, Cardinal d'Amboise, while at Nantes, when the Duke Valentino, commonly called Caesar Borgia, son of Pope Alexander VI, made himself master of the Romagna. On that occasion the Cardinal said to me that the Italians did not understand the art of war, which I replied that the French did not understand statesmanship, for if they had understood it, they would never have allowed the Church to attain such greatness of power. For experience proves that the greatness of the Church and that of Spain and Italy were brought about by France, and their own ruin resulted therefrom. From this we draw the general rule which never or rarely fails. The prince who causes another to become powerful thereby works his own ruin. He has contributed to the powers of others either by his own adaptability or force, and both the one and the other will be mistrusted by him whom he has thus made powerful. Yeah. That chapter were a bit longer. I think we'll do a bit more discussion. Have a quick drink first. Right, so this chapter here lays out a bit more groundwork than the other two, and that it establishes a number of rules for a person who would seek to conquer I should say not conquer, but to hold or conquer territory, namely in the senses of how to do it and how not to do it. The main rules being either reside there yourself or establish colonies and key positions so that you have strong control of strong points at a low expense without imposing upon the people. Empower those weak allies or those weak powers within the country, or if not empower them, protect them, I should say. You don't want to empower them. And attack or weaken those powers that are great within the country and are a threat to you. Don't allow other powerful outsiders to come in. I think that's all the rules. And these are then fairly ably demonstrated by the example of the actions of Louis XII, who seemingly broke every single one of them. Oh, and there's another one, I suppose. It was his sixth mistake, which was allowing his allies to be weakened by, I guess it was alienating his allies, which otherwise would have maintained his position even in spite of all the others. I suppose that's something. Yeah. They seem reasonable rules to me, I don't know. I'm not much of a conqueror, but they all seem eminently sensible, and, well, of course, what am I saying? They're pretty well demonstrated by the example given, so I think there's something to them. Good water today. That's precious. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of commentary needed on that, really. The wording's a little bit flowery, but I mean, by the dates given, I'm imagining this is quite an old text, so I'm somewhat forgiving of that. Let's press on. Chapter 4. While the kingdom of Darius, which were conquered by Alexander, did not revolt against the successors of Alexander after his death. If we reflect upon the difficulties of preserving a newly acquired state, it seems marvellous that after the rapid conquest of all Asia by Alexander the Great, and his subsequent death, which one would suppose most naturally to have provoked the old country to revolt, yet his successors maintained their position with it, and experienced no other difficulties in holding it than such as arose among themselves from their own ambition. I make this observation by saying that all principalities of which we have any accounts have been governed in one of two ways, viz. Either by one absolute prince, to whom all others are as slaves, some of whom, ministers by his grace and consent, aid him in the government of his realm, or else by a prince and nobles, who hold that rank not by the grace of their sovereign, but by the antiquity of their lineage. Such nobles have estates and subjects of their own, who recognise them as their liege lords, and have a natural affection for them. In those states that are governed by an absolute prince and slaves, the prince has far more power and authority, for in his entire dominion no one recognises any other superior but him. And if they obey anyone else, they do it as though to his minister and officer, without any particular affection for such official. Turkey and France provide us examples of these two different systems of government at the present time. The old country of the Turk is governed by one master, all the rest are his slaves, and having divided the country into sanjaks, a district, he appoints governors for each of them, who he changes and replaces at his pleasure. The King of France is placed in the midst of a large number of ancient nobles who are recognised and acknowledged by their subjects as their lords, and are held in great affection by them. They have the rank and prerogatives of which the king cannot deprive them without danger to himself. In observing now these two principalities, we perceive the difficulty of conquering the empire of the Turk. But once conquered, it will be very easily held. The reasons that make the conquest of the Turkish empire so difficult are that the conqueror cannot be called into the country by any of the great nobles of the state, nor can he hope that his attempt can be facilitated by a result of those who surround the sovereign, which arises from the above given reason. But being all slaves and dependent on their sovereign, it is more difficult to corrupt them, and even if they were corrupted, but little advantage could be withdraw from them, as they cannot carry the people along with them. Whoever therefore attacks the Turks must expect to find them united, and must depend wholly upon his own forces and not upon any internal disturbances. But once having defeated and driven the Turk from the field, so that he cannot reorganise his army, then he will have nothing to fear but the line of the sovereign. This, however, once extinguished, the conqueror has nothing to apprehend from anyone else, as none of there is any influence with the people, and thus having had nothing to hope from them before the victory, he will have nothing to fear from them afterwards. The contrary takes place in kingdoms governed like that of France. For having gained over some of the great nobles of the realm, there will be no difficulty in entering them. There being always malcontents and others who desire a change. These, for the reasons stated, can open the way of the country for the assailant and facilitate his success. But for the conqueror to remain himself there afterwards will involve infinite difficulties, both with the conquered and with those who have aided him in his conquest. Nor will it suffice to extinguish the line of the sovereign, because the great nobles remain, will place themselves at the head of new movements, and the conqueror, not being able either to satisfy or to crush them, will lose the country again on the first occasion that presents itself. If now we consider the nature of the government of Darius of Persia, we shall find that it resembled that of the Turk, and therefore it were necessary for Alexander to attack him in full force, and drive him from the field. After this victory and the death of Darius, Alexander remained in secure possession of the kingdom for the reasons above explained, and if his sudden successors remained united, they might also enjoy possession at their ease, for no other disturbances occurred in the empire except such as they created themselves. Countries, however, with a system of government like that of France, cannot possibly be held so easily. The frequent insurrections of Spain, France, and Greece against the Romans were due to the many petty princes that existed in these states, and therefore, so long as the memory of these princes endured, the Romans were ever uncertain in the tenure of those states. But all remembrance of those princes once effaced, the Romans became secure possessors of the country, so long as the growth and power of their empire endured, and even afterward, fighting among themselves, each of the parties were able to keep for themselves portions of those countries, according to the authority which they had acquired there. And the line of their sovereigns being extinguished, the inhabitants recognised no other authority but that of the Romans. Reflecting now upon these things, we cannot be surprised at the facility with which Alexander maintained himself in Asia, nor at the difficulties which others experienced in preserving their conquest, as was the case with Pyrrhus and many others, which resulted not from the greater or lesser valour of the conqueror, but from the different nature of the conquered state. That's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, I can see the logic behind it. I don't know if I fully agree with the idea that ministers and sort of non-noble bearing officials are equivalent to slaves under a prince or an emperor or whatever. But there's something to be said for the idea that not having empowered nobles means that there is much more stability in a state. But if anything, that's a very strong argument for a princedom with no nobles, because it means that the state is secure, both for you and for after it is conquered, obviously, but also that it is a more powerful and secure state against conquest. In fact, in that chapter, Machiavelli manages to make a very succinct and solid argument against the concept of nobility. I'm not entirely sure if that's his intention or whether it's just tangential to his point. Still, interesting. Of course, there is something to be said for the nobility, in that they have all the funnest titles. I mean, king is fine, emperor is pretty impressive, but marquis? Viscount? Ooh, those are some titles. Grand Poobah, there's a man. No. Of course, they may be scheming and unstable, and they may undermine the stability and power of the state and prosperity, but funny titles. How's a man of the sun? I don't know, I'm a rat. Anyway, back to it. Chapter 5. Now the cities of principalities are to be governed that previous to being conquered had lived under their own laws. Conquered states that have been accustomed to liberty and the government of their own laws can be held by the conqueror in three different ways. The first is to ruin them, the second for the conqueror to go and reside there in person, and the third is to allow them to continue to live under their own laws, subject to a regular tribute, and to create in them a government of few who will keep the country friendly to the conqueror. Such a government, having been established by the new prince, knows that it cannot maintain itself without the support of his power and friendship, and it becomes its interest, therefore, to sustain him. A city that has been accustomed to free institutions is much easier held by its own citizens than in any other way, if the conqueror desires to preserve it. The Spartans and the Romans will serve as examples of these different ways of holding and conquering a state. The Spartans held Athens and Thebes, creating there a government of few, and yet they lost both these states again. The Romans, for the purpose of retaining Capua, Carthage, and Numantia, destroyed them but did not lose them. They wished to preserve Greece in somewhat the same way that the Spartans held it, by making her free and leaving her in the enjoyment of her own laws, but did not succeed, so they were obliged to destroy many cities in the country for the purpose of holding it. In truth, there were no other safe way of keeping possession of that country but to ruin it. Whoever becomes master of a city that has been accustomed to liberty and does not destroy it must himself expect to be ruined by it. They will always resort to rebellion in the name of liberty, and their ancient institutions, which will never be effaced from their memory, either by the lapse of time or the benefits bestowed by the new master. No matter what he may do or what precautions he may take, if he does not separate and disperse the inhabitants, they will on the first occasion invoke the name of liberty and the memory of their ancient institutions, as was done by Pisa after having been held over 100 years in subjugation by the Florentines. It is very different with the states that have been accustomed to live under a prince. When the line of the prince is once extinguished, the inhabitants, being on the one hand accustomed to obey, on the other hand having lost their ancient sovereign, neither agree to create a new one from amongst themselves, nor do they know how to live in liberty, and thus they will be less prompt to take up arms, and the new prince will readily be able to gain their goodwill and was sure of himself of them. The republics have more vitality, greater spirit of resentment and desire of revenge. The memory of their ancient liberty neither can nor will permit them to remain quiet, and therefore the surest way of them is either to destroy them or for the conqueror to go and live there. That's chapter 5. Seems to me that there's, this Machiavelli fella quite admires republics. So he's writing a book on how to run a principality. I suppose he says he talked about republic quite a lot in other places. Maybe we'll find those books someday. Chapter 6. A new principalities that have been acquired by the valour of the prince and by his own troops. Let no one wonder if, in what I'm about to say, of entirely new principalities of the prince and his government, I cite the very highest examples, for as men almost always follow the beaten track of others and proceed in their actions by imitation, and yet cannot altogether follow the ways of others, nor attain the high qualities of those whom they imitate, so a wise man should ever follow the ways of great men, and endeavour to imitate only such as have been most eminent, so that even if his merits do not quite equal theirs, yet that they may in some measure reflect that greatness. Do as the skilful archer, who, seeking that the object he desires to hit is too distant, and knowing the extent to which his bow will carry, aims higher than the destined mark, not for the purpose of sending his arrow to that height, but so that by the elevation it may reach the desired aim. I'll say then that a new prince in an entirely new principality will experience more or less difficulty in maintaining himself according as he has more or less courage and ability, and as such an as to become a prince from a mere private individual presupposes either great courage or rare good fortune. It would seem that one or the other of these two causes ought in measure to mitigate many of these difficulties, but he who depends least upon fortune will maintain himself best, which will be still more easy for the prince if, having no other state, he is obliged to reside in his newly acquired principality. To come now to those who by their courage and ability, and not by their fortune, have risen to the rank of rulers, I will say that the most eminent of such were Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, Theseus, and the like. And although we may not discuss Moses, who were a mere executor of things ordained by God, yet he merits our admiration, if only for that grace which made him worthy to hold direct communion with the Almighty. If we consider Cyrus and others who have conquered or founded empires, we shall find them all worthy of admiration. For if we study their acts in particular ordinances, they do not seem very different from those of Moses, although he had so great a teacher. We shall also find in examining their acts and lives that they had no other favours from fortune but opportunity, which gave them the material which they could mould into whatever form seemed to them best. Without such opportunity, the great qualities of their souls would have been wasted, whilst without those great qualities, the opportunities would have been in vain. It was necessary for Moses to find the people of Israel slaves in Egypt, oppressed by the Egyptians, so that escaped from that bondage they resolved to follow him. It was necessary that Romulus should not have been kept in Alba, and that he should have been exposed at his birth, for him to have become the founder and king of Rome. And so it was necessary for Cyrus to find the Persians dissatisfied with the rule of the Medes, and find the Medes effeminate and enfeebled by long peace. And finally, Theseus could not have manifested his courage had he not found the Athenians dispersed. These opportunities, therefore, made these men fortunate, and it was their lofty virtue that enabled them to recognise the opportunities by which their countries were made lustrous and most happy. Those who by similar noble conduct become princes acquire their principalities with difficulty, but maintain them with ease. The difficulties with which they experience in acquiring their principalities arise in part from the new ordinances and customs which they are obliged to introduce, for the purpose of founding their state and their own security. You must bear in mind, then, that there is nothing more difficult, dangerous, or more doubtful of success than an attempt to introduce a new order of things in any state. But the innovator has for enemies all those who derive divides from the old order of things, whilst those who expect to be benefited by the new institution will be but lukewarm defenders. This indifference arises in part from fear of their adversaries, who are favoured by the existing laws, and partly from their incredulity at men who have no faith in anything new that is not the result of well-established experience. Hence it is that, whenever the opponent of the new older order of things have the opportunity to attack it, they will do it, the zeal of partisan, while the other defend it but feebly, so that it is dangerous to rely upon the latter. If we desire to discuss this subject thoroughly, it will be necessary to examine whether such innovators depend upon themselves, whether they rely upon others, that is to say, whether for the purpose of carrying out their plans they have to resort to entreaties, or whether... I don't know what that thing was for. Themselves, whether they rely upon others, that is to say, whether for the purpose of carrying out their plans they have to resort to entreaties, whether they can be accomplished by force. In the first case, they always succeed badly, fail to conclude anything. When they depend upon their own strength to carry their innovation through, then they rarely incur any danger. Hence it was that all prophets who came with arms in hand were successful, those who were not armed were ruined. But beside the reasons given above, the disposition of people are variable. It is easy to persuade... Oh, here's another thing again. What's that noise? Oh my god, it's weird. What? The first case, they will succeed badly and fail to conclude anything, and depend upon their own strength to carry their innovations through, and they rarely incur any danger. Hence it was that all prophets who came with arms in hand were successful, those who were not armed were ruined. But beside the reason given above, the disposition of peoples are variable. It is easy to persuade them to anything, but difficult to confirm them in that belief. Therefore a prophet should be prepared, in case the people will not believe any more, to be able by force to compel them in that belief. Neither Moses, Cyrus, Theseus, nor Romulus would have been able to make their laws and institutions observed for any length of time if they had not been prepared to enforce them with arms. This was the experience of Brother Girolamo Savonarola, who failed in his attempt to establish a new order of things so soon as the multitude ceased to believe in it. For he had not the means to keep his believers firm in their faith, nor to make the unbelievers believe. And yet these great men experienced great difficulty in their course, and met danger at every step, which could only be overcome by their courage and ability. Once having surmounted them, then they began to be held in veneration, and having crushed those who were jealous of their great qualities, they remained powerful, secure, honoured, and happy. To these great examples I will add a minor one, which nevertheless bears some relation to them, and will suffice me for all similar cases. This is Aro of Syracuse, whom from a mere private individual rose to be Prince of Syracuse, although he owed no other favours to fortune than the opportunity. The Syracusans, being oppressed, elected him their captain, whence he advanced by his merits to become their prince. And even in his condition as a private citizen, he displayed such virtue that the author who wrote of him said that he lacked nothing of being a monarch except in a kingdom. Aro disbanded the old army and organised a new one. He abandoned his old allies and formed new alliances, and having thus an army and allies of his own creation, he had no difficulty in erecting any edifice upon such a foundation. So that although he had much trouble in attaining the principality, yet he had but little in maintaining it. That's the end of chapter 6. I don't know what that noise is. I mean, I know it's supposed to be some sort of alert from this, but I'm not seeing anything in chat or anything, so I don't know what's up with that. not seeing anything that could be worse than that. Well, sorry about that, folks. Right, so then, we have here is a list of people who are admired by Machiavelli, and a list of reasons as to why he admires them, namely, or well, I suppose that's the way he considers them successful. Namely, that through difficulty and personal ability and valour, they instituted and reformed their societies such that those societies were always and forever loyal to them, served them faithfully. Which makes sense, being that they were sort of shaped in the images that their people desire, or that these men desire. But of course, it is more difficult to do that and requires great valor. I'm not actually clear on this chapter on whether he's advising to go through the effort of reshaping the society to make it fit you, or if he is against the idea. I think maybe it's more a neutral thing. It's just an example of a choice. You can go through great difficulty at the start of acquiring a place, and it will serve you well, or you can leave it be and it will be easier to handle, but will require more ongoing maintenance. I suppose there are advantages and disadvantages to both options. Yeah, it's interesting. Right then. So long as there's no more tinkling noises, I suppose we should press on. Let's see. We're getting along in this book. We're about page 25 and it runs about 100 pages, so we're about a quarter of the way through. 50 minutes, so that puts us, what, hour 42, 3 hours and 20 minutes around about. Long but not untenable. Push through. A new principality, chapter 7. A new principalities that have been acquired by the aid of others and by good fortune. Those who by good fortune only rise from mere private station as dignity of princes have but little trouble in achieving that elevation. They fly there as if it were on wings, but their difficulties begin after they have been placed in the high position. Such are those who acquire a state either by means of money or by their favour as some powerful monarch who bestows it upon them. Many such instances occurred in Greece, the cities of Ionia and of the Hellespont, where men were made princes by Darius so that they might hold the place for his security and glory. Such were those emperors who, from having been mere private individuals, attained the empire by corrupting the soldiery. These remain simply subject to the will and the fortune of those who bestowed greatness upon them, which are two most uncertain and variable things, and generally these men have neither the skill nor the power to maintain that high rank. They know not, for unless they are men of great genius and ability, it is not reasonable they should know how to command, having never occupied any but private stations, and they cannot, because they have no troops upon whose loyalty and attachment they can depend. Moreover, states that spring up suddenly, like other things in nature that are born and attain their growth rapidly, cannot have those roots and supports that will protect them from destruction by the first unfavourable weather. Unless indeed, as has been said by those who will suddenly become princes are gifted with such ability, they quickly know how to prepare themselves for the preservation of that which fortune has cast into their lap, and afterwards to build up those foundations which others have laid before becoming princes. In illustration of the one or the other of these two ways of becoming princes, by valour and ability or by good fortune, I will adduce two examples from the time within our own memory. These are Francisco Sforza and Cesare Borgia. Cesare Borgia. Francesco, by legitimate means and by great natural ability, rose from a private citizen to be Duke of Milan. Having attained that high position by 1,000 efforts, it cost him but little trouble afterward to maintain it. On the other hand, Cesare Borgia, commonly called Duke of Valentino, acquired his state by the good fortune of his father, but lost it when no longer sustained by that good fortune. Although he employed all the means and did all that a brave and prudent man can do to take root in that state, which had been bestowed upon him by the arms of good fortunes of another. For as we have said above, he who does not lay the foundation of his power beforehand may be able by great ability and courage to do so afterwards, but it will be done with great trouble to the builder, and danger the edifice. If now we consider the old course of Duke Valentino, we shall see that he took pains to lay a solid foundation for his future power, which I think it were to discuss, for I should not know what better lesson I could give to a new prince than to hold up to him the example of the Duke of Valentino's conduct. And if the measures which he adopted did not ensure his final success, the fault was not his, for his failure with using the extreme and extraordinary malignancy of fortune. Pope Alexander VI, in his effort to aggrandize his son, the Duke of Valentino, encountered many difficulties, immediate and prospective. In the first place, he saw that there were no chance of making him master of any state unless a state of the church. They knew that neither the Duke of Milan nor the Venetians would consent to that. Faenza and Rimini were already at that time under the protection of the Venetians, and the armies of Italy, especially those of which could be availed themselves, were in the hands of men who had cause to fear the powers of the Pope, namely the Orsini and the Colonna, two noble Roman families, and their adherents, and therefore he could not rely upon them. It became necessary, therefore, for Alexander to disturb the existing order of things and to disorganize those states in order to make himself safely master of them. And thus it was easy for him to do, for he found the Venetians, influenced by other reasons favourable to the return of the French into Italy, which not only did he not oppose, but facilitated by the dissolving of the former marriage of King Louis XII, so as to enable him to marry Anne of Brittany. The king thereupon entered Italy with the aid of the Venetians and the consent of Alexander, and no sooner was he in Milan than the Pope obtained troops from him to aid in the conquest of Romagna, which was yielded to him through the influence of the king. Duke Valentino, having thus acquired Romagna, and the Colonna being discouraged, he both wished to hold that province and also to push his possession still further, but were prevented by two circumstances. The one was that his own troops seemed to him not to be reliable, and the other was the will of the King of France. Is to say, he feared lest the Orsini troops, which he had made use of, might fail on him in the critical moment, and not only prevent him from acquiring more, but even take from him that which he had acquired, and that even the King of France might do the same. The disposition of the Orsini the Duke had approved when, after the capture of Faenza, he attacked Bologna and saw with what indifference they moved the assault. As to the King of France, he knew his mind, but when he wanted to march into Tuscany after having taken the Duchy of Urbino, King Louis made him desist from that undertaking. The Duke resolved therefore to rely no longer upon the fortune or arms of others, and the first thing he did was to weaken the Orsini and the Colonna in Rome, by winning over to himself all the gentlemen adherents of those houses, by taking them into his own pay as gentlemen followers, giving them liberal stipends and bestowing honours upon them in proportion to their condition, and giving them appointments and command, so that in the course of a few months all their attachment to their faction were extinguished, and they all became devoted followers of the Duke. After that, having successfully dispersed the Colonna faction, he watched for an opportunity to crush the Orsini, which soon presented itself, and which he made the most. The Orsini, having been slow to perceive that the aggrandizement of the Duke and of the Church would prove the cause of their ruin, convened a meeting at Magone in the Perugian territory, which gave rise to the revolt of Urbino, and the disturbances of the Romagna caused infinite dangers to the Duke of Valentino, all of which, however, he overcame with the aid of the French. Having thus re-established his reputation, and trusted no longer in the French or any other foreign power, he had recourse to deceit, so as to avoid putting them to the test. And so well did he know how to dissemble and conceal his intentions that the Orsini became reconciled to him, though through the agency of the Signor Paolo, and the Duke had won over him to himself by means of all possible good offices and gifts of money, clothing and horses. And thus their credulity led them into the hands of the Duke of Sinigaglia. The chiefs thus destroyed and their adherents converted into his friends, the Duke had laid sufficiently good foundations for his power, having made himself master of the whole of the Romagna and the Duchy of Urbino, and attached their entire population to himself by giving them a foretaste of the new prosperity which they would enjoy under him. And as this part of the Duke's proceedings is well worthy of notice and may serve as an example to others, I will dwell upon it more fully. Having conquered the Romagna, the Duke found it under control of a number of impotent tyrants, devoted themselves more to plundering their subjects than to governing them properly, and encouraging discord and disorder among them rather than peace and union. So this province was infested by brigands, torn by quarrels, and given over to every sort of violence. He saw at once that to restore order amongst the inhabitants and obedience to the sovereign, it was necessary to establish a good and vigorous government now. For this purpose he appointed as governor of that province Don Ramiro Dorca, a man of cruelty but at the same time of great energy, to whom he gave plenary power. In a very short time, Dorca reduced the province to peace and order, thereby gaining for him the highest reputation. After a while, the Duke found such excessive exercise of authority no longer necessary or expedient, He feared that it might render himself odious. He therefore established a civil tribunal in the art of the province, under an excellent president, where every city should have its own advocate, and having observed that the past rigour of Ramiro had engendered some hatred, he wished to show the people, for the purpose of removing that feeling from their minds, and with their entire confidence, that if any cruelties had been practised, they had not originated with him, but resulted altogether from the arse nature of his minister. He therefore took occasion to have Messer Ramiro put to death, his body cut into 2 parts, and exposed in the marketplace of Cessna one morning. A block of wood and a bloody cut was left beside him. The horror of the spectacle caused the people to remain for a time stupefied and satisfied. But let's return to where we started from. I say then that the Duke, feeling himself strong enough now and in measure secure from immediate danger, having raised an armed force of his own and having in great part destroyed those who were near him might have troubled him, wanted now to proceed with his conquest. The only power remaining which he had to fear were the King of France, upon whose support he knew that he could not count, although the King had been late in discovering that his error of having allowed the Duke's aggrandizement. The Duke therefore began to look for new alliances and to prevaricate with the French about their entering the kingdom of Naples for the purpose of attacking the Spaniards, who were then engaged in the siege of Gaeta. The intention would have placed them in such a position that they would not be able to arm him, and in this he would have succeeded easily if Pope Alexander had lived. Such was the course of Duke Valentino with regard to the immediate present. He had cause for apprehension as to the future, mainly lest the new successor of the papal chair should not be friendly to him, should attempt to take from him what had been given to him by Alexander. And this he thought of preventing in several different ways. One, by extirpating the families of those whom he had despoiled, so as to deprive the Pope of all pretext of restoring their possessions. Secondly, by gaining over himself all the gentlemen of Rome, so as to be able to, through them, to keep the Pope in check. Thirdly, by getting the College of Cardinals under his control. And fourthly, by acquiring so much power before the death of Alexander, that he might by himself be able to resist the first attack of his enemies. Of these 4 things, he had accomplished 3 at the time of Alexander's death. For of the petty tyrants whom he had despoiled, he had killed as many as he could lay hands on, but very few had been able to save themselves. He had won over to himself the gentlemen of Rome, and had secured a large majority in the Sacred College, and as to further acquisitions, he contemplated making himself master of Tuscany, and already possession of Perugia, Piombino, and having assumed a protectorate over Pisa. There being no longer occasion to be apprehensive of France, which had been deprived of the kingdom of Naples by the Spaniards, so that both of these powers had to seek his friendship, he suddenly seized Pisa. After this, Lucca and Siena promptly yielded to him, partly from jealousy of the Florentines, and partly from fear. Thus Florence saw no safety from the Duke, and if he had succeeded in taking the city, he could have done as he could have done in the very year of Alexander's death, he would have so increased his power and influence that he would have been able to have sustained himself alone, without depending upon the fortune or power of anyone else, and relying solely upon his own strength and courage. But Alexander died 5 years after the Duke had first unsheathed his sword. He left his son with only his government of the Romagna firmly established, all his other possessions entirely uncertain, ending between 2 powerful hostile armies, and himself sick unto death. Such were the Duke's energy and courage, and so well did he know that how men are either won or destroyed, and so solid were the foundations which he had in so brief a time laid for his greatness, that if he had not had these 2 armies upon his back, and had been an elf, he would have sustained himself against all difficulties. And the foundations of his power were well laid, may be judged by the fact that the Romagna remained faithful, and waited quietly for him for more than a month, and that although half dead with sickness, yet they were perfectly secure in Rome, and that although the Baroni of Vitelli and Orsini came to Rome at the time, yet they could not raise a party against him. Unable to make a pope of his own choice, yet he could prevent the election of anyone that were not acceptable to him, and had the Duke been an elf at the time of Alexander's death, everything would have gone well with him. He said to me on the day when Julius II was created pope, that he had provided for everything that could possibly occur in case of his father's death, except that he had never thought that at the moment he should himself be so near dying. From reviewing now all the actions of the Duke, I should not know where to blame him. It seems to me that I should rather hold him up as an example, as I have said, to be imitated by all those who have risen to something, either by good fortune or the arms of others. But being endowed with great courage and having lofty ambition, he could not have acted otherwise under the circumstances, and the only thing that defeated his desires was the shortness of Alexander's life and his own bodily infirmity. Whoever then, in newly acquired state, finds it necessary to secure himself against his enemies, to gain friends, to conquer by force or by cunning, make himself feared or beloved by the people, be followed and revered by the soldiery, destroy all who good or might injure him, substitute anew for the old order of things, to be severe and yet gracious, magnanimous and liberal, to disband a disloyal army and create a new one, to preserve the friendship of kings and princes so that they may bestow benefits upon him with grace, but fear to injure him, such a one, I say, cannot find more recent examples than those presented by the conduct of Duke Valentino. The only thing we can blame him for was the election of Julius II to the pontificate, which were a bad selection for him to make, for as has been said, he was not able to make a pope to his own liking, yet he could have prevented and should have never have consented to the election of one from among those cardinals he had offended, or who, if he had been elected, would have had occasion to fear him, for either fear or resentment makes men enemies. Those whom the Duke offended were amongst others the Cardinals San Pietro, Narinsola, afterwards Julius II, Colonna, San Giorgio, and Ascanio. All the others, had they come to their pontificate, would have had to fear him, except in d'Amboise and the Spanish cardinals, the latter because of certain relations and reciprocal obligations, and the former because of his power he had in France for his ally. The Duke then should by all means have had one of the Spanish cardinals made pope, and failing in that he should have supported the election of Cardinal d'Amboise, and not that of Cardinal San Pietro and Niccolò. Whoever thinks that among great personages recent benefits will cause old injuries to be forgotten deceives himself greatly. The Duke then, in consenting to the election of Julius II, committed an error which proved the cause of his ultimate ruin. Oh. I haven't started so light, this book is getting a little bit heavy as we go on. But yeah, I can see his points here though. I quite like the use of an example of a man who failed to achieve his goals in the end. You always hear examples of people who did the right thing by way of successful people. And obviously it makes sense because people who succeed have done the right thing generally, or got very lucky. But I like here the successful example being a man who failed ultimately in his ambitions because his failure was caused in large part by the vagaries of fate. He got ill and had armies at his back at an opportune time. Well, the examples are pretty solid, yeah. You're undermining the power of groups who are opposed to you, gathering your things together, ensuring yourself against your enemies. All makes a lot of sense to me. And there's no king, there's nothing down here really. But yeah, much like the old Princess game anyway. It's a bit of a bother. It's interesting though. If any would-be princes out there have want for a scheme and advisor, I suppose I will make myself available at leisure. Have a quick drink, and then we'll go. Chapter 5. On such as have achieved sovereignty by means of crime. Ooh, hello. Well, not chapter 5, chapter 8. As there are also two ways in which a person may arise from private station of sovereignty, which can neither be attributed to fortune nor to valour, it seems to me they should not be left unnoticed. Well, it seems to me that they should not be left unnoticed. Although one of these ways might be more fully discussed when we treat of the public, these two modes are when one achieves sovereignty either by wicked and nefarious means, or when a private citizen becomes sovereign of his country by the favour of his fellow citizens. I'll explain the first by two examples, one ancient and the other modern, and without entering otherwise into the merits of these cases, I'll judge they will suffice to anyone who may find himself obliged to imitate. And Gethocles, a Sicilian, rose to be king of Syracuse, not only from being a mere private citizen, but from the lowest and most abject condition. With the son of a potter, and led a vicious life through all the various phases of his career. His wickedness were coupled with so much moral and physical courage that, having joined the army, he rose by successive steps until he became praetor of Syracuse. Having attained that rank, he resolved to make himself sovereign, and retain by violence and regardless of others that which had been entrusted to him by public consent. For this purpose, he came to an understanding with Hamilcar, the Carthaginian, who were at that time carrying on a war with his army in Sicily. And one morning called an assembly of the people and the Senate of Syracuse, as though he wished to confer with them about public affairs. He made his soldiers, at a given signal, slay all the senators and the richest of the people, and then seize the sovereignty of the city without any resistance on the part of the citizens. Although afterwards twice defeated by the Carthaginians and finally besieged by them in Syracuse, he not only defended the city, but, leaving a portion of his forces to sustain the siege, he crossed the sea with the other part and attacked Africa, thus raising the siege of Syracuse in short time and driving the Carthaginians to the extreme necessity, compelling them to make terms with him and remain content with the possession of Africa, and leave Sicily to him. Whoever now reflects upon the conduct and valour of Agathocles will find them little or nothing that can be attributed to fortune, for, as I have said, he achieved sovereignty not by the favour of anyone, but through his rank in the army, which he had won by 1,000 efforts and dangers, and he afterwards maintained his sovereignty with great courage, and even temerity. And yet we cannot call it valour to massacre one's fellow citizens, betray one's friends, and to be devoid of good faith, mercy, and religion. Such means may enable a man to achieve empire, but not glory. Still, if we consider the valour of Agathocles in the encountering and overcoming dangers, his invincible courage in supporting and mastering adversity, we shall find no reason why he should be regarded inferior to any of the most celebrated captains. With all this, his outrageous cruelty and inhumanity, together with his infinite crimes, will not permit him to be classed with the most celebrated men. We cannot therefore ascribe to either valour or fortune the achievements of Agathocles, which he accomplished without either the one or the other. In our own times, during the pontificate of Alexander VI, Olivietto de Fermo, having been left an orphan, were brought up by his maternal uncle, Giovanni Fogliani, and were in early youth placed in the military service under Paolo Vitelli, so that after having been thoroughly trained and disciplined, he might attain prominent rank in the army. After the death of Paolo, he served under his brother Vitellozzo, and became, in very short time, by his intelligence, his bodily strength, and intrepidity, one of the foremost men in his service. Even at servile to act under the command of others, he planned, together with some other of the citizens of Fermo, who preferred servitude to liberty to their country, and with the concurrence of Vitellozzo, to seize the Fermo and make himself lord of the same. With this object, he wrote to his uncle Giovanni Fogliani that, having been absent from home for several years, he desired now to come to see him in his native city, and also to look upon his patrimony, and that having until then striven only to acquire honour, he desired to show his fellow citizens that he had not laboured in vain, and therefore he wished to come in splendid style, accompanied by 100 cavaliers, friend of his. He begged his uncle, therefore, to be pleased to arrange that the inhabitants of Fermo should give him an honourable reception, which would be an honour not only to him, but also to Giovanni, who were his near relative and had brought him up. Giovanni therefore omitted no courtesies due to his nephew, and caused the citizens of Fermo to give him an honourable reception, as well as lodgings in their houses for himself and all his retinue. After spending some days in Fermo and arranging all that were necessary for the execution of his villainous design, Oliverotto gave a sumptuous entertainment, to which he invited his uncle Giovanni and all the principal citizens of Fermo. After the dinner and the other entertainments that were customary on such occasions, Oliverotto artfully started a grave discussion respecting the greatness of Pope Alexander VI and his son Caesar Borgia and their enterprises. When Giovanni and the others replied to his remarks, Olivietto certainly rose, saying that these things were only to be spoken of in private places, and withdrew to another room, whither Giovanni and the other citizens followed. No sooner had they seated themselves there than some of Olivietto's soldiers rushed out from concealment and massacred Giovanni and all the others. After this murder, Olivietto mounted his horse, rode through the streets of Fermo, and besieged the supreme magistrates in the palace, who, constrained by fear, obeyed him, formed a government of which Olivietto made himself sovereign. And as all those who, as malcontents, might have injured him, had been put to death, Olivietto fortified himself in his position with the new institutions, both civil and military, so that for the space of a year during which he held the sovereignty, he were not only secure in the city of Fermo, but had become formidable to all his neighbours, so that he would have been difficult to overcome him as Agathocles, had he not allowed himself to be deceived by Caesar Borgia, when, as I have related, he entrapped the Orsini and Vitelli at Sinigaglia. Olivietto was also taken and strangled, together with Vitellozzo, his master in valour and in villainy, just 1 year after he had committed his patricide, and having his uncle Giovanni Fogliani assassinated. I'm struggling with these names. Some may wonder how it was that Agathocles and others like him, after their infinite treason and cruelty, could live for any length of time securely in the countries whose sovereignty they had usurped, and even defended themselves successfully against external enemies without any attempts on the part of their own citizens to conspire against them. Whilst many others could not by means of cruelty maintain their state even in times of peace, much less in doubtful times of war, I believe that this happened according as the cruelties were well or ill applied. We may call cruelty well applied, if we may call that well which is in itself evil, when it is committed once from necessity for self-protection, and afterwards not persisted in, but converted as far as possible to the public good. Ill-applied cruelties are those which, though at first but few, yet increase with time rather than cease altogether. Those who adopt the first practice may, with the help of God and man, render some service to their state, as has been done by Agathocles. Those who adopt the latter course will not possibly be able to maintain themselves in their state. Whence it is to be noted that in taking possession of the state, the conqueror should well reflect as to the harsh measures that may be necessary, and execute them as a single blow, so as not to be obliged to renew them every day, and by thus not repeating them, to assure himself of the support of the inhabitants, and to win them over to himself by benefits bestowed. And he who acts otherwise, either from timidity or from being badly advised, will be obliged ever to be sword in hand, and will never be able to rely on his subjects, who in turn will not be able to rely upon him, because of the constant fresh wrongs committed by him. Cruelty should be committed all at once, as in the way that each separate one is less felt, and give less offence. Benefits, on the other hand, should be conferred one at a time, for in that way they will be more appreciated. But above all, a prince should live upon such terms with his subjects that no accidents, either good or for evil, should make him vary his conduct towards them. When adverse times bring upon you the necessity for action, you will no longer be in time to do evil, and the good you may do will not profit you, because it will be regarded as having been forced from you, and therefore will bring you no thanks. That's the end of chapter 8. Well, these aren't especially long chapters, but they are dense and heavy in some ways. God. But yeah, I follow the logic here. If you're going to do evil to a person or to a people, you want to be doing an evil, or rather a quick and rapid evil that immediately eliminates as many of your enemies as possible. Same way, if you're going to get rid of a man, you want to kill him by stabbing him once rather than drawing out a fight. The more time things go on, the longer you have time for things to go wrong, and the longer you have time for resentment to build up, which is no good for you. Whereas if you do your evil in one go, people are a little shocked and a little overwhelmed by it, and then if you are instilling good and doing them favours and bringing them benefits before they have time to settle into their dislike of you, you can comfortably recover your position as a benevolent or at least accepted ruler. I do appreciate the sort of amorality of these lessons. Amorality? Yeah, amorality, not immorality. They're not making a judgment on whether it is right or wrong. Now, they are making judgments as they go, but their discussion in equanimity, the advantages and disadvantages of the various acts of treason. Now, I don't think there's much more to say on that matter, other than the examples tend to be good at proving the points again, but I do very distantly hear the sound of whistling. And that whistling means that there is a beast coming of a particular sort, so I've got to go hard real quick. So if you will excuse me, I will return very shortly. Bye. Alright, yeah, it's quiet now. Whistler's gone. Hate that bloody thing. These were most of the beasts. When they come by, they're all mindless rage and screaming and hollering, and if you avoid them, they just move on real quick. That bloody thing. Casual as you like, it strolls around when it's taken in the air. Looks around, peers in little corners, God. Nightmare. Don't normally come by this way, so hopefully we won't see it again for a while, but where? Nature of the library, I suppose, nature of things. God, sometimes this place wears on me. Right. Anyway, oh yes, yeah, evil actions can secure one a principality, etc. I think we're ready to move on, weren't we? So, what? Chapter 9, the civil principalities. Let's come now to that other case where a prominent citizen has become prince of his country not by treason and violence, but by the favour of his fellow citizens. This may be called a civil principality, and to attain it requires neither great virtue nor extraordinary good fortune, but rather an happy shrewdness. I'll say then that such principalities are achieved either by the favour of the people, or by that of the nobles. For in every state there will be found two different dispositions which result from this, and what the people dislike being ruled and oppressed by the nobles, whilst the nobles seek to rule and oppress the people. And this diversity of feeling and interest engenders one of three effects in a state. These are either a principality, or a government of liberty, or licence. A principality results from the will of the people or from that of the nobles, according as either one or the other prevails and has the opportunity. For the nobles, seeing that they cannot resist the people, begin to have recourse to the influence and reputation of one of their own class, and make him a prince so that under the shadow of his power they may give free scope to their desires. The people also, seeing that they cannot resist the nobles, have recourse to the influence and reputation of one man, and make him a prince, so as to be protected by his authority. He who becomes a prince by the aid of other of the nobles will have more difficulty in maintaining himself than he who arrives in that high station by the aid of the people. For the former finds himself surrounded by many who, in their own opinion, are equal to him, and for that reason he can neither command nor manage them in his own way. But he who attains principality by favour of the people stands alone, and is around none or very few that will not yield him ready obedience. Moreover, you cannot satisfy the nobles with honesty, without wrong to others. It is easy to satisfy the people, whose aims are ever more honest than those of the nobles, the latter wishing to oppress, and the former being unwilling to be oppressed. I will say further that a prince can never assure himself of the people who are hostile to him. They are too numerous, the nobles on the other hand being but few, it becomes easy for a prince to make himself sure of them. The worst that a prince may expect of the people who are unfriendly to him is that they will desert him. But the hostile nobles he has to fear, not only lest they abandon him, but also because they will turn against him. They, being more far-sighted and astute, always save themselves in advance and seek to secure the favour of them whom they hope may be successful. The prince also is obliged always to live with the same people. He can do very well without the same nobles, whom he can make and unmake at will any day, and bestow upon them or deprive them of their rank wherever it pleases him. The better to elucidate this subject, we must consider the nobles mainly in two ways. That is to say, they either shape their conduct so as to ally themselves entirely to your fortunes, or they do not. Those who attach themselves to you thus, if they are not rapacious, are to be honoured and loved. Those who do not attach themselves to you must be regarded in two ways. Either they are influenced by pusillanimity and a natural lack of courage, and then you may make use of them, and especially of such as are men of intelligence. For in prosperity they will honour you, and in adversity you need not fear them. If they purposely avoid attaching themselves to you from notions of ambition, then it is evident that they think more of their own interest than yours. Such men a prince must be beware, and look upon them as open enemies, for when adversity comes they will always turn against him and contribute to his ruin. Anyone, therefore, who has become a prince by the favour of the people must endeavour to preserve their goodwill, which will be easy for him, as they will ask of him no more than that he shall not oppress them. But he who, contrary to the will of the people, has become prince by the favour of the nobles, should at once and before everything else strive to win the goodwill of the people, which will be easy for him, by taking them under his protection. And as men, when they receive benefits from one of whom they expected only ill treatment, will attach themselves readily to such a benefactor, so the people will become more kindly disposed to such a one than if he had been made prince by their favour. Now, a prince can secure the goodwill of the people in various ways, which differ with their character, and for which no fixed rules can be given. I I'll merely conclude by saying that it is essential for a prince to possess the goodwill and affection of his people, otherwise he will be utterly without support in time of adversity. Nabis, Prince of Sparta, sustained the attacks of all Greece and of a victorious Roman army and successfully defended his country and his state against them. And when danger came, it were enough for him to be assured of a few supports which would not have sufficed if the people had been hostile to him. And let no one contravene this opinion of mine by quoting the trite saying that he who relies upon the people builds upon quicksand. Though this may be true when a private citizen places his reliance upon the people in the belief that they will come to his relief when he is oppressed by his enemies or the magistrates, in such a case he will often find himself deceived, as happened in Rome to the Gracchi and in Florence to Messer Scali. It being a prince who places his reliance upon those whom he might command, and being a man of courage and undismayed by adversity, and not having neglected to make proper precautions and keeping all animated by his own courageous example, and by his orders, he will not be deceived by the people, and will be seen that the foundations of his state are laid solidly. Those princes run great risks who attempt to change a civil government into an absolute one, for such princes command either in person or by means of magistrates. In the latter case, their state is more feeble and precarious, for the prince is in all things dependent upon the will of those citizens who are placed at the head of the magistracy, who in particular in times of adversity may with great ease deprive him of the government, either by open opposition or by refusing him obedience. When danger is upon him, the prince is no longer in time to assume absolute authority, but the citizens and subjects who have been accustomed to receive their commands from the magistrates will not be disposed to yield obedience to the prince when in adversity. Then in doubtful times there will ever be a lack of men whom he can trust. Such a prince cannot depend upon what he observes in ordinary quiet times. When the citizens have need of his authority, for then everybody runs at his bidding, everybody promises, and everybody is willing to die for him, and death is very remote. But in adverse times, when the government has need of the citizens, then but few will be found to stand by the prince. And this experience is the more dangerous as can only be made once. A wise prince, therefore, will steadily pursue such a course that the citizens of his state will always and under all circumstances feel the need of his authority, and will therefore always prove faithful to him. Oh, lordy lord. Right, I'm trying to think. Sorry, I'm struggling with some of this. He uses quite long sentences, does Machiavelli, it seems. And I struggle to follow them to their sort of logical endpoints, because they just run on. It's weird how a sentence works like that. Like a short sentence, generally you can understand how it's meant to be formed and how it will sort of cut itself off. But the longer one runs, the more it sort of becomes a winding paragraph and will sort of change how it sort of modulates itself as it goes on, so you can't really understand where it's going from the beginning. It's annoying. At least as a reader. Well, maybe mostly because I'm reading that now. But no, also I struggle to follow them in my head too. It's annoying. Yeah, let's talk about this then. So, a prince who is appointed by others, either nobles or the common people, must, well, it seems in all cases, must assure the loyalty of the people and the obedience of the nobles, no matter which side it comes from. Which is interesting. Yeah. Yeah, there's not really. I don't think there's really a lot to say on this. Like, this is, for all that it's long and sort of long-winded and has a lot of examples, in a lot of ways this is really just a sort of how-to guide. It's quite a simple book in a lot of its principles. It tells you what to do and gives examples of why doing those things works. And it does it quite well, so it's hard to argue with it. I just wish it were a little less long-winded. Yeah. Having said that, yeah, I don't think there's any reason for me to linger here. Let's press on to the next chapter. Chapter 10. What's this? Oh, hang on, I'm saying something. Okay, so apparently the whistler's moving in. Yeah, okay, this shouldn't matter. Never mind. Shouldn't be important. Chapter 10. In what manner the power of all principalities should be measured? In examining the nature of the different principalities, it is proper to consider another point, namely, whether a prince is sufficiently powerful to be able, in case of need, to sustain himself, or whether he is obliged always to depend upon others for his defence. And I'll explain this point the better. I say that in my judgment, those are able to maintain themselves who, from an abundance of men and money, put a well-appointed army into the field and meet anyone in open battle that may attempt to attack them. And I esteem those as having need of the constant support of others who cannot meet their enemies in the field, but are under the necessity of taking refuge behind walls and keeping within them. The first case I have already treated and shall speak of it again hereafter as occasion may require. In the second case I cannot say otherwise than that it behooves such princes to fortify the cities where they have their seat of government, and to provide them well with all necessary supplies without paying much attention to the country. For any prince that has thoroughly thought of the city in which he resides, and has in other respects placed himself on good footing with his subjects, as has been explained above, will not be readily attacked, and men will ever be indisposed to engage in enterprises that present manifest difficulties. And it cannot be regarded as an easy understanding to attack a prince in a city which he has thoroughly fortified and who is not hated by his people. The cities of Germany enjoy great liberties. They own little land outside of the walls, and obey the emperor at their pleasure. There are neither him nor any other neighbouring power, for they are so well fortified that their capture would manifestly be tedious and difficult. They all have suitable walls and ditches, and are amply supplied with artillery, and always keep in their public magazines a year's supply of provisions, drink, and fuel. Moreover, by way of feeding the people without expense to the public, they always keep on hand a common stock of raw material that lasts for 1 year, just to give employment in those branches of industry by which the people are accustomed to gain their living, which are the nerve and life of the city. They also attach much importance to military exercises, and have established many regulations for their proper practice. A prince, then, who has a well-fortified city, has not made himself odious to his people, cannot be readily attacked, and if anyone be nevertheless rash enough to make the attempt, he would have to abandon it ignominiously, for the things of this world are so uncertain that it seems almost impossible that anyone should be able to remain a whole year with his army inactive, carrying on the siege. And if anyone were to argue that if the people who have possession outside the city were to see them ravaged and destroyed by the enemy, they would lose their patience, and their selfish desire to protect their property would cause them to forget their attachment to the prince, I would meet this objection by saying that a powerful and valiant prince will easily overcome this difficulty by encouraging his subjects with the hope that the evil will not endure long, or by alarming them with fears of the enemy's cruelty, or by assuring himself adroitly those who have been too forward in expressing their discontent. It is moreover reasonable to suppose that the enemy will ravage and destroy the country immediately upon his arrival before the city, and while its inhabitants are still full of courage and eager for defence. The prince therefore has the less ground for apprehension, because by the time that the ardour of his people has cooled somewhat, the damage has already been done, and the evil is past remedy. And then the people will be in the more ready to stand for their prince, for they will regard him as under obligations to them, for houses having been burnt and their property ravaged by his defence, or in his defence. For it is the nature of mankind to become as much attached to others by the benefits they bestow upon them as those which they receive. And all things considered, then, it would not be difficult for a prudent prince to keep up the courage of his citizens in times of siege, both in the beginning as well as afterwards, for there be no lack of provisions or means of defence. I'm struggling there. Well, I don't know what happened. I was getting on pretty well at first. A really weird tickle in my throat. Don't know what it is. It's It's I'll describe it. It's weird. It's sort of scratchy. It's like there's something caught in it. I haven't anything so hard enough to catch in the throat, given that I only ever have cheese. It's like I swallow a small splinter. I suppose I could swallow a small splinter. Can't be wood in the library. I think I would have. Maybe I don't know. I have one of the lamps, which are the little lozenges lamp will give me. It's been an hour and change. And then from there we'll press on. I'm not sure I'm actually going to finish this tonight. 3 hours seems a little bit more ambitious now that I've just got run up against the text. Like if it was something like what do you call it, the Twain yesterday, or the Runyon we had the day before, were easy to read, I wouldn't mind like 3-4 hours of the read. But because it's so heavy and dense, and I keep losing my place and wandering off. It's taken a lot out of me to read this. But I think I'll try and at least get through to the halfway mark, so that I can finish it in a similar manner. Probably tomorrow. And maybe I'll push a little bit further on and then see if I can't find like a short story or something tomorrow to go with it. Perhaps a little bit. Or let's have something a little bit lighter after that. Yeah? I still haven't talked about the commentary yet. Building a little defensive citadel you can put yourself up inside is, to me, perhaps the most elementally sensible thing that has been said today. Every rat knows that a good burrow or warren you can hide away in with food in it to keep you going is great whenever you're chased by cats or dogs or other dangerous predatory animals. An ideal is an ideal thing to have, and I can't imagine why it would be any different for a prince than it would be for an average rat. So, yeah, very strong piece of advice there in my personal opinion. Yeah, let's hang on. No. Sorry, I thought I heard the whistling again, but no. Just an overactive imagination there. Right. Where are we? Yeah. Chapter 11 of Ecclesiastical Principalities. It remains now only to speak of ecclesiastical principalities, and the attainment of which all difficulties occur beforehand. To achieve them requires either virtue or good fortune. They are maintained without either the one or the other. They are sustained by those ancient ordinances of religion, which are so powerful and of such quality, they maintain their position no matter what their conduct or mode of life may be. These are the only princes that have states without the necessity of defending them, and subjects without governing them, and their states, though undefended, are not taken from them, whilst their subjects are indifferent in the fact that they are not governed, and have no thought of the possibility of alienating themselves from their prince. These ecclesiastical principalities, then, are the only ones that are secure and happy, and being under the direction of the supreme wisdom which human minds cannot attain, I'll abstain from all of further discussion of them, for they are raised up and sustained by the divine power, and it would be a bold and presumptuous office for any man to discuss them. Nevertheless, if anyone asks how it comes that the Church has acquired such power and greatness in temporal matters, though previous to Alexander VI, all the Italian potentates, and even the great barons and the smallest nobles, paid so little regard to the temporal powers of the Church, whilst now a king of France trembles before it, and this power has been able to drive him out of Italy and to ruin the Venetians, I shall not deem it superfluous to recall to memory the circumstances of the growth of the temporal powers, although they are well known. Before King Charles VIII of France came into Italy, the country were under the rule of the Pope, the Venetians, the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and the Florentines. These powers were obliged always to keep in view two important points. The one, not to permit any foreign powers to come into Italy with an armed force, and the other, to prevent each other from further aggrandizement. Those who had to be most closely watched by the others were the Pope and the Venetians. To restrain the latter required the united power of all others, as was the case in the defence of Ferrara, and to keep the Pope in check, they availed themselves of the barons of Rome, who were divided into two factions, the Orsini and the Colonna. There being a constant cause of quarrel between them, they were always with arms in hands under the very eye of the Pope, which kept the papal power weak and infirm. And although now and then a courageous Pope arose who succeeded for a time in repressing this faction, as for instance Sixtus IV, yet neither wisdom nor good fortune could ever relieve them entirely from this annoyance. The cause of this difficulty was the shortness of their lives. In the 10 years, which is about the average length of life of the Pope, it would be difficult for him to crush out either one of the factions entirely. And if, for instance, one Pope should have succeeded in putting down the Colonna, another one, hostile to the Orsini, would arise and resuscitate the Colonna, but would not have the time to put down the Orsini. This was the reason why the temporal power of the Pope was so little respected in Italy. Afterwards, Alexander VI came to the pontificate, who more than any of his predecessors showed what a Pope could accomplish with the money and power of the Church. Availing himself of the opportunity of the French invasion of Italy, and the instrumentality of the Duke Valentino, Alexander accomplished all these things of which I have mentioned when speaking about the actions of the Duke. And although Alexander's object was not the aggrandizement of the Church, but rather that of his son, the Duke, yet all his efforts served to advance the interest of the Church. which after his death and that of his son, related all the results of his labours. Soon after came Julius II, who found the church powerful and mistress of the entire Romagna, with the Roman barons crushed and the faction destroyed by the vigorous blow of Alexander. He also found the way prepared for the accumulation of money which had never been employed before at the time of Alexander. Julius II not only continued the system of Alexander, but carried it even further, resolved to acquire the possession of Bologna, to ruin the Venetians, and to drive the French out of Italy, and all of which he succeeded. And this was more praiseworthy in him, inasmuch as he did all these things not for his own aggrandizement, but for that of the Church. He furthermore restrained the Orsini and the Colonna factions within the limits in which they found them upon his ascension to the pontificate, and although there were some attempts at disturbances between them, yet the two things that kept them down, one the power of the Church, which overruled them, and the other the fact that neither of them had any cardinals, who were generally the fomenters of the disturbances between them. Nor will the party feuds ever cease so long as the cardinals take any part in them, for it is they who stir up the factions in Rome as well as elsewhere, and then force the barons to sustain them, and it is thus that the ambition of these prelates gives rise to the discord and the disturbances among the barons. His Holiness Pope Leo X thus found the Church all powerful on his ascension, and it is to be hoped that if his predecessors have made the Church great by means of arms, he will make her still greater and more venerable by his goodness and infinite other virtues. Just going to take a moment here and go back. Lorenzo, son of Piero de' Medici. This was addressed to Lorenzo Medici. Who was the Duke of Romagna? Was he a Medici? Valentino Borgia, not Medici. Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if some of these accounts were intended to honour ancestors or relatives of the person it was written for, but it doesn't seem like it, or if they are, which got indirect relations, which I cannot properly account for. Yeah. But yeah, so, what was it? I mean, it's papal states, what was it called? It? Ecclesiastical principalities, that's it. I mean, it seems pretty clear in his treatment of them that they are just temporal powers with the backing of the Church, but it seems impolitic to talk about them because, you know, God is listening or whatever. I'm trying to think if there's any commentary to be really made here. I think there is an interesting aspect to this in the the discussion of the limitation of the papacy by the re-election of the Pope. Yeah, the fact that the Pope only sort of stays around for about 10 years very much limits the ability he has to act, or how much influence he can exert to crush his enemies or overcome them. Because while it's not necessarily super relevant to most actual princedoms and dictatorships, it does have an interesting reflection on the nature of modern republican democracy, where generally you have things like term limits to limit the amount of power a single person can exercise. But in limiting that amount of power, you limit both the influence they can have over the state, but also the aims they can successfully achieve with their administration. It's something to consider, both positive and negative in some ways. I mean, like you said, Pope Alexander VI, I don't know how long he reigned, but because he took advantage of the situation, we're able to massively expand the temporal power of the Church. But he didn't do it for the good of the Church, like his predecessor? What's the one that comes after? Predecessor is prior to successor. He didn't do it for the benefit of the Church like his successor did. He did it to benefit his son, so sort of developing temporal power for his own family. Also, aren't popes supposed to be celibate? What? Just going to double check that. No, Alexander's object was not the aggrandizement of the church, but rather that of his own son. Yeah. Ah. Ain't that just a thing? Then again, I suppose the sort of man who would corruptly bend the power of the church and all its supposed authority and majesty and the will of God to benefit in his own family is also the sort of man who might comfortably break his vows of chastity. So, makes sense. Yeah, I don't think there's much else I can say about that. I'm not a religious rat in particular. I've never read the Bible, but in some way in my head, I have some understanding of it on account of the weird goo I ate and all the sort of understanding and memories it gives me for some reason. I don't think it says much about rats. I don't know if there's a god of rats. If there is, he doesn't seem to have done much for me, so I'm kind of withhold judgment on that part. So moving on. Chapter 12. On the different kind of troops and the mercenaries. Having discussed in detail the characteristics of all those kind of principalities which are proposed at the outset of the tree, and having examined to some extent the causes of their success or failure and explained the means by which they may have sought to acquire and maintain them, it remains for me now to discuss generally the means of offence and defence which such princes may have to employ under the various circumstances above referred to. Oh, this is why there's a sword in it. We have said how mercenary it is for a prince to lay solid how necessary it is for a prince to lay solid foundations for his power, as without such he would inevitably be ruined. The main foundation which all states must have, whether new or old, or mixed, are good laws and good armies. And as there can be no good laws where there are not good armies, so the laws will be apt to be good where the armies are so. I will therefore leave the question of the laws and confine myself to that of the armies. I say then the armies with which a prince defends his state are either his own, or they are mercenaries or auxiliaries, or they are mixed. Mercenary and auxiliary troops are both useless and dangerous, and if anyone attempts to found his state upon mercenaries, it will never be stable or secure, for they are disunited, ambitious, and without discipline, faithless and braggarts among friends, but amongst enemies cowards, and have neither fear of God nor good faith with men, so that the ruin of the prince who depends on them will be deferred only just so long as an attack is delayed. In peace he will be spoiled by his mercenaries, and in war by his enemies. The reason of all this is that mercenary troops are not influenced by affection, or by any other consideration except their small staff men, which is not enough to make them willing to die for you. They are ready to serve you as soldiers so long as you're at peace, but when war comes they will either run away or march off. There is no difficulty in demonstrating the truth of this, for the present ruin of Italy could be attributed to nothing else but the fact that she has for many years depended upon many mercenary armies, who for a time had some success and seemed brave enough among themselves, but as soon as foreign enemies came they showed what stuff they were made of. This was the reason why Charles VIII, King of France, were allowed to take Italy with scarcely an effort, as it were with merely a piece of chalk. Charles VIII had merely to send a quartermaster ahead with a piece of chalk to mark the houses in which French troops were to be quartered. Those who assert that our misfortunes were caused by our own fault speak the truth. But these faults were not such as are generally supposed to have been the cause, but those rather which I have pointed out, and as it was the princes who committed these faults, so they also suffered the penalties. I will demonstrate more fully the unhappy consequence of employing mercenary armies. Their commanders are either competent or they are not. If they are, then you cannot trust them, because their chief aim will always be their own aggrandizement, either by imposing upon you, who are their employer, or by oppressing others beyond your intentions. And if they are incompetent, then they will certainly hasten your ruin. If now you meet those remarks by saying that the same will be the case with every commander, whether a mercenary troop or others, I reply that inasmuch as armies are employed either by a prince or by republics, the prince should always be in person to perform the duty of commanding his army, and a republic should send one of her own citizens to command her troops. And in case he should not be successful, then they must change him. If he is victorious, then they must be careful to keep him within the law, so that he may not exceed his powers. Experience has shown that princes as well as republics achieve the greatest success in war when they themselves direct the movement of their own armies, whilst mercenary troops do nothing but damage, and the republic that has armies of her own is much less easily subjugated to servitude by one of her own citizens than one that depends upon foreign troops. Thus Rome and Sparta maintained their liberties for many centuries by having armies of their own. The Swiss are most thoroughly armed and consequently enjoy the greatest independence and liberty. The Carthaginians, on the other hand, furnish an example of the danger of employing mercenaries. They came very near being subjugated by them at the close of their first war with Rome, though they had appointed some of their own citizens as commanders. After the death of Epaminondas, the Thebans made Philip of Macedon commander of their army, who after having been victorious deprived the Thebans of their liberty. The Milanese, after the death of Duke Philip, employed Francisco Sforza against the Venetians. After having defeated them at Caravaggio, he combined with them to subjugate his employers, the Milanese. The father of Francisco Sforza, who was commander in the service of Queen Joanna of Naples, suddenly left her entirely without troops, in consequence of which she was compelled to throw herself upon the protection of the King of Aragon to save her kingdom. And if the Venetians and the Florentines formally extended their dominion by means of mercenaries, without their commanders attempting to make themselves princes of the country, but rather defending it loyally, I can only say that the Florentines were greatly favoured by fortune in that respect. For the valiant captains whose ambition they might have feared, some were not victorious, some never met an enemy, and others directed their ambition elsewhere. Among those who were not victorious was Giovanni Agotto, John Shaw, whose good faith was never put to that test, he having been unsuccessful in the field. Though it would be generally admitted that had he been successful, the Florentines would have been at his mercy. The Sforzas and the Bracceschi were always opposed to each other, which caused Florence to direct his ambition towards Lombardy, or which caused Francisco to direct his ambition towards Lombardy, and Braccio turned towards the Church and the Kingdom of Naples. But let us come now to occurrences of more recent date. The Florentines had confirmed the command of their troops upon Paolo Vitelli, a soldier of the greatest ability, and who had risen from private station to the highest post and reputation. No one will deny that if he had succeeded in taking Pisa, the Florentines would have been obligated to submit to him. If he had gone over to the enemy, or had he gone over to the enemy, they would have been helpless, and if they kept him, they would have been obliged to submit to his terms. If now we look at the Venetians, we shall find they carried on their wars securely and gloriously, so long as they confined themselves to their proper element, the water, where they conducted their operations most bravely with the nobles and their own people. When they engaged in wars on land, they no longer acted with their customary bravery, and adopted the habit of the other Italian states of employing mercenary troops. And although the beginning of that growth of their dominion on land, they had no occasion to have any serious apprehension of their commanders, because their own reputation were great and their possession of land not small. Yet when they extended these, which were under the captaincy of Carmignuola, they became sensible of their error. For although they were aware that it was by his superior conduct that they had defeated the Duke of Milan, yet on observing his lukewarmness in the further conduct of the war, they concluded that they could no longer hope for a victory under his command. Still, they dared not dismiss him for fear of losing what they had gained, and therefore they deemed it necessary for their own security to put him to death. After that, the Venetians employed as generals of their forces Bartolomeo di Bergamo, Roberto di San Servino, the Count Pitigliano, and the like, with whom they had reason rather to apprehend losses than to expect successes, as indeed happened afterwards at Vela, where in one battle they lost what had taken them 800 years of great labour to acquire. With this kind of troop, acquisition are feeble and slow, whilst losses are quick and extraordinary. Having thus far confined my examples to Italy, which has been for many years controlled by mercenary armies, I will now go back to an earlier period in discussion of the subject, so that having seen the origin and progress of the system, it may the more effectively be corrected. You must know then that at the earliest times, so soon as the Roman Empire began to lose its power and credit in Italy, and when the Pope acquired more influence in temporal matters, Italy became subdivided into a number of states. Many of the large cities took up arms against their nobles, who, encouraged by the emperor, had kept them oppressed. The Church, by way of increasing her own influence in temporal matters, favoured this revolt of the cities against their nobles. In many other cities, the supreme power were usurped by some of their own citizens, who made themselves princes of the same. Thus it were that Italy, as it were, passed under the dominion of the Church and certain republics. And as these citizens and prelates were not accustomed to the management of armies, they began to hire foreigners for this purpose. The first who brought this sort of military into high repute was Alberigo de Como, a native of the Romagna, who were under his discipline that Braccio and Sforza were trained, and these in turn became the arbiters of Italy. Oh. I wish ruin and rot upon your house, you who bring a bot here. You come to sell me things, die, and die in pain. It was under his discipline that Braccio and Sforza were trained, and these in turn became the arbiters of Italy. They were succeeded by all those others who up to that time had led the armies of Italy. The result of all their valour was that she were overrun by the French under Charles VIII, ravaged and plundered by Louis XII, oppressed by Ferdinand of Spain, and insulted and vituperated by the Swiss. Just banning that now. Right. The course which these mercenary leaders pursued for the purpose of giving reputation and credit to their own mounted forces was first to decry and destroy the reputation of the infantry of the several states. They did this because, having no territorial possessions of their own, and being mere soldiers of fortune, they could achieve no reputation by means of a small body of infantry. For larger forces they could not furnish subsistence, and therefore they confined themselves to cavalry, a smaller force of which enabled them more readily to gain success and credit, and was at the same time more easily subsisted. In this way they brought matters to the point that, in an army of 20,000, there were not over 2,000 infantry. Moreover, they used all means and ingenuity to expose themselves and their men to great fatigue and danger, never killing each other in their encounters, but merely taking prisoners who were afterwards liberated without ransom. They never made any night attacks when besieging a place, nor did the besieged make any night sorties. They never properly entrenched their camps, and never kept the field in winter. All these practices were permitted by the rules of war, which were devised by them expressly, as we have said, to avoid hardship and danger, so that Italy were brought to shame and slavery by the system of employing mercenary troops. Ooh, and that's the end of chapter 12. That is also about the halfway mark. Let's discuss this. Yeah, so let's see. So first things first, I must admit, I'm fond of mercenaries in sort of a general way. Not that I've known many mercenaries, but their attitude, especially the attitude of gaining maximum benefit for yourself while screwing over whoever you're working for, resounds deeply within my rat-shaped soul. Pay what you can, give nothing back, you know? Why would you die for a man who's paying you money? Just for your living, eh? So, what else? Yeah, I mean, in the same token, of course, I do recognise that, yeah, it's very unwise to hire mercenaries, because why would they respect and die for you just for money? No. If you're a mercenary and someone's paying you, you don't die for them. You leave when the going gets tough. If you're a ruler or prince or whatever, and what do you call it? Yeah, and you want to defend your city effectively, you don't hire mercenaries. You have locals who have, you know, investment in your city or republic or whatever, and have something to lose. Just common sense. That being said, I do think that I do think there is an understandable appeal in some of the things he said about mercenaries, like the use of cavalry. That struck me as quite clever. Needing a small force of cavalry to be able to sustain it, needing a small force to be able to sustain it, and needing cavalry over infantry to be able to affect great reputation, have the appearance of doing great things. That's good. Well, so we're about the halfway point now, and I think I'm starting to get a less of a handle on this. I'm not sure I've fully comprehended the last couple of chapters, at least not as well as I did the first. But being that we are a little more than halfway through this book, I think I will call it there. Because, means we'll finish up tomorrow at a good time. Maybe we'll find a good, nice, light, short story to do afterwards. But yeah, this book is it's taken longer than I thought it would. Not hugely longer. We're looking at the rate we're going, probably 2 hours rather than 3 and 20, which or 4 hours rather than 3 and 20, I should say. But it is a lot heavier than I expected it to be. And I think I keep pushing through it, I would fail to get much out of it, and I'd keep messing up. And that would make things worse for all. I'll break it into 2 parts. Yeah, that being said, I think it's an interesting little book. It's interesting to me that it is directed towards a single man. I'm sure there's an history here that's interesting, but I don't have the context. I'm only left to wonder. It's a nice little book on how to run your own petty kingdom or princedom or whatever. A principality, I should say. And yeah, I think it manages to do a good job of giving fairly impartial advice without too much regard to morality. It does a great job of backing up all its points with examples, and I do like that it uses both which are ancient and more recent examples, at least recent by the time. And yeah, I think a lot of its principles are very sensible. Some of them are obvious to me, but and a lot of humans don't realise they're obvious things. That thing of having a thought if I see. I wonder how many humans would have overlooked that. This Machiavelli, he's got this good sense of a rat. I'll say that for him. He's only had the good sense to run short of sentences though. Anyway, I think we are about done on things I can say about this. Yeah, so probably I'll see you tomorrow for the rest of this, and maybe a short story if I can find one. I do thank you again for showing up, anyone who did, and anyone who watches this later. And that being the case, ta-ra!